Am I the a-hole for kicking my wife and her daughter out of my house? I, 32M, and my wife, Andy, 34F, have been together for about 3 years now. We've been married for one of those years, and for the most part, our relationship has been the kind of partnership I always hoped for. We get along really well, we share similar goals, and there was a genuine sense of peace between us when it was just the two of us. The only problem, the massive, looming shadow over our entire marriage, is her daughter, Carrie, 16F. Carrie is from Andy's previous marriage. Her father died in a horrific car accident about 5 years ago. I never met the man, but I know his death shattered their world. When Andy and I started dating, we took things incredibly slow. She was a protective mother, and I respected that more than anything. She didn't introduce me to Carrie until she was absolutely certain that things were serious between us, which was about 8 months into the relationship. The first meeting was awkward, but I expected that. However, as time went on, Carrie's awkwardness morphed into something much more pointed. She was distant, cold, and overall, she was mean to me. I took it in stride. I understood that she was a grieving teenager and that seeing her mother with another man must have been a psychological minefield. I tried to bond with her. I bought her gifts I thought she'd like, I offered to take her to concerts, and I tried to engage with her interests. But I never forced it. I never wanted to be the stepfather who demands respect or affection. I explicitly told her to address me by my first name and made it clear I had zero intention of trying to replace her father. I just wanted us to get along and coexist in a healthy way. Things seemed to stabilize for a while, but the underlying tension never truly went away. She would make rude, under-the-breath comments about my clothes, my job, or the way I spoke. She'd make inappropriate remarks about how her real dad would never do things the way I did. I never snapped back. I'd just look at Andy, and Andy would pull me aside and tell me to just give her more time, that she was still processing her trauma. So, I bit my tongue. For 2 years, I was the bigger person. Things really escalated after our marriage a year ago. Before the wedding, we lived in separate apartments. Once we tied the knot, I offered my wife and her daughter the chance to move into my house. It's a place I worked incredibly hard for, a 4-bedroom home in a quiet, nice neighborhood. Andy immediately agreed, thrilled at the prospect of more space and no rent. Carrie, however, was not on board. She fought it every step of the way, but since she was only 15 at the time, my wife gave her no choice. That move-in day was the beginning of a year-long nightmare. The moment Carrie stepped through the door of my home, it felt like she declared war on the structure itself. It started with small things that I tried to convince myself were accidents. A glass would break in the kitchen. A plate would shatter. But then the accidents became frequent and suspiciously dangerous. I'd walk into the kitchen at 6 a.m. to get coffee and find a shattered wine glass spread across the tile floor, specifically placed in the high-traffic area between the fridge and the counter. She wouldn't just break things, she would leave the sharp glass on the ground, waiting for someone to step on it. When I'd confront her, she'd just shrug and say she dropped it and forgot. Then came the window phase. She started throwing things out of her second-story bedroom window, old books, shoes, electronics, just to see them hit the driveway. Once, she threw a heavy glass candle holder that nearly hit my neighbor's dog. She began shouting insults at our neighbors from her window for no reason, calling them names and making our lives a living hell in a community where I had spent years building a good reputation. This would happen like twice a week. I admit I have a bad temper when I'm pushed to my limit. I like order, and I like respect. So, yes, sometimes I yelled at her. I'd find a mess and lose my cool, demanding she come downstairs and clean it up immediately. But I want to be very clear, I never laid my hands on her. I never physically punished her. I only used my voice to demand she stop destroying the house I worked for. My wife would repeatedly tell her to stop behaving like that, but there were no real consequences. Andy's discipline was a soft-spoken talk in Carrie's room that changed nothing. This went on for a year. I was exhausted in my own home. I felt like a guest in a war zone. Last week, she outdone herself. Andy and I had gone out for a rare dinner, just the two of us, to try and reconnect away from the stress of the house. We were having a decent time until we pulled into the driveway. I noticed the garage door was wide open. My heart dropped because I'm meticulous about home security. We got out of the car and walked into the garage, and I froze. There was Carrie. She wasn't just acting out, she was on a mission. She was standing next to my car. I have a BMW X5, which is my pride and joy and a very expensive investment. She had a kitchen knife in one hand and her house keys in the other. She had already slashed 2 of the tires. The thick rubber was hissed out, and the car was slumped to one side. But that wasn't the worst part. She had used her keys to deep scratch, not my dad, and several profanities into the driver's side door and the hood. The metal was gouged. The paint was ruined. I completely snapped. The year of broken glass, the insults, the neighbors, the constant disrespect, it all boiled over in a second. I didn't see a grieving kid anymore. I saw a person who was actively trying to ruin my life. I screamed at the top of my lungs. I called her an evil little bitch and told her to get the fuck out of my house. I was shaking with rage. I turned to Andy, expecting her to be as horrified as I was. But instead of looking at the thousands of dollars in damage, Andy looked at me with a face full of judgment. She immediately sided with Carrie. She started shouting that I was overreacting, that Carrie was just acting out because of her father's anniversary coming up, and that I should never call her daughter a name like that. I was furious. I pointed at the car, at the slashed tires, at the ruined paint. She is destroying my life, Andy. She is destroying my property in the house I let her live in for free. Andy kept making excuses, saying we could just fix it and that I was being verbally abusive to a child. I told my wife right then and there that if she was okay with Carrie destroying my stuff, then she could get the fuck out as well. We argued in that garage and then in the hallway for about 15 minutes. It was the most intense, visceral fight of my life. During the argument, I told them both that I wanted Carrie to pay for the repairs to my car. I told them that if they didn't figure out a way to reimburse me, I would sue her. I have a high-end Nest camera in my garage, and I told them point blank, I have everything recorded. I have her on video committing a crime. Andy's face went pale. She told me I couldn't do that to family, that I was heartless and a monster for threatening a 16-year-old with a lawsuit. She said she didn't realize she married a man who would prioritize a car over a child's mental health. In response to that, I didn't want to hear another word. I was done being the bigger person. I told them both to pack their bags and get out. It was almost 12 p.m., midnight. I didn't care. I told them to go to a hotel or to Andy's sister's place, but they weren't spending another minute under my roof. They packed a few suitcases while Andy sobbed and called me every name in the book. Carrie just smirked at me as she walked out the door, which almost made me lose it again. They left, and the house has been silent for the first time in a year. When I think about it now, sitting in my quiet, lonely living room, I know I could have handled the situation better. I shouldn't have called a teenager a bitch, and I probably shouldn't have kicked them out at midnight. I could have been calmer. But honestly, I think this had to happen. I realized in that garage that Andy will never hold her daughter accountable, and I will always be the one paying the price, literally and emotionally. We will be having a divorce. There is no coming back from this. I've already contacted a lawyer to start the process, and I am absolutely following through with seeing a lawyer to sue Carrie, or technically Andy, I suppose, as her guardian, for the damages to the BMW. I am just so fed up with being the victim of her toxicity. I talked about this with my parents. My dad is on my side, but my mom thinks I'm the asshole. She says that as the adult, I should have sucked it up and that family is more important than a car. But I don't feel like they were ever my family. I felt like I was a bank and a punching bag. So, am I the a-hole? Update. It's been a couple of weeks since everything blew up, and the house has stayed quiet in a way I'm still getting used to. No broken glass in the mornings, no complaints from neighbors, no tension walking from one room to another. Just silence and the normal sounds of a place that isn't being constantly disrupted. That part alone has made it easier to think clearly about what happened and what needed to come next. Not long after that night, Andy reached out and asked to meet. We agreed to sit down somewhere neutral and actually talk things through without it turning into another argument. The conversation wasn't dramatic or drawn out, just direct. She wanted to try to fix things, said she believed we could still make the marriage work if we reset and approached everything differently. It wasn't an emotional plea as much as it was her trying to find a way forward that didn't involve ending everything. I told her I wasn't interested in trying again. It wasn't said out of anger, more like a decision that had already settled in. The past year had been constant stress, and it reached a point where I didn't see a version of things improving without the same patterns repeating. The situation with Carrie wasn't something that had come out of nowhere. It had been building for a long time, and even when it escalated, there wasn't any real accountability on her side or any structure to stop it from happening again. Andy didn't argue much when I said I wanted a divorce. She looked like she expected it, even if she didn't want it. We both acknowledged that continuing like this wouldn't help anyone, including Carrie. The focus shifted pretty quickly to what needed to be handled practically instead of trying to revisit the argument from that night. We had a prenup in place, which made things straightforward. We didn't share finances, and the marriage itself hadn't been long, so there wasn't much to divide. We went to a lawyer together, signed the necessary papers, and started the formal process. There are still a few small things left to finalize, but overall it moved quickly and without complications. The more complicated part was the damage to the car. I met with my own lawyer separately to get a clear idea of what that would look like. We had the vehicle assessed properly, and the total came out to around €6,000. Between the tires, the deep scratches across multiple panels, and the damage to the windows, it wasn't something minor that could be brushed off or handled cheaply. I contacted my insurance company hoping there might be some coverage, but they confirmed that vandalism like this wasn't included in my policy. That left me with two options: absorb the cost myself or take legal action. My lawyer strongly recommended documenting everything formally, including filing a report with the police. Not as a way to escalate things unnecessarily, but to make sure there was an official record of what happened, especially since there was clear video evidence. He made it clear that if anything became contested later, having that report would matter. I went ahead with it. The process itself was straightforward, just giving a statement and providing the footage. It didn't turn into anything dramatic at that stage, but it set things in motion legally. A few days later, Andy and I met again, this time specifically to deal with the financial side. Both of us brought our lawyers so there wouldn't be any confusion about what was being agreed to. I laid out the situation as it stood, including the insurance decision and the full estimate for repairs. She was upfront about not having the money to cover it immediately. After leaving the house, she and Carrie had moved in with her parents, and she was trying to figure out her next steps. Between finding a new place and covering basic expenses, she didn't have the ability to pay a lump sum like that. Instead of pushing for something she couldn't realistically provide, I had a different arrangement. I would cover the repair costs up front so the car could be fixed without further delay, and she would pay me back over time. It wasn't ideal, but it was a practical solution that avoided dragging things out longer than necessary. She agreed to that without much hesitation. The terms were written out clearly so there wouldn't be any misunderstandings later. It wasn't about punishing anyone at that point, just making sure the damage was addressed in a way that was actually workable. Because of the police report, there are still legal consequences for Carrie. From what my lawyer explained, it won't be something extreme, but it will likely involve a formal process where the situation is reviewed. The expectation is that she'll be required to attend therapy as part of it and complete a certain number of community service hours. There's also the issue of a record, which isn't something I take lightly, but it's also a direct result of what happened. Andy told me she had already arranged for Carrie to start therapy. She began attending sessions last week. That was one of the few parts of this that felt like a step in the right direction, regardless of everything else. Outside of that, contact between us has been minimal. There hasn't been any back and forth or attempts to revisit the relationship again. The focus has stayed on closing things out properly and keeping everything as straightforward as possible. The last couple of weeks have been rough in their own way, mostly because everything changed very quickly. At the same time, the constant stress that had been there for the past year is gone, and that difference is noticeable. Friends have been around more than usual, which helped more than I expected. At this point, most of it is settled. The divorce is nearly finalized, the car repairs are underway, and the legal side is moving forward on its own timeline. There isn't much left to argue about or revisit. It didn't end the way I thought it would when we got married, but given how things had been going, it also didn't come out of nowhere.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update.